Hey guys. Much better. Hey guys, Seth the Mad Duck here. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm obviously here at the computer, but I want to go through kind of my thought process on where orcs are in terms of list selection right now competitively, ultimate leading up to, that is, what I am taking to the Cherokee Open. Okay, so to kind of give myself an idea of where orcs are in the meta and where I want to go with them, I'm using some data. There's a group called StatCheck. Some friends of mine, check them out. But they have this amazing dashboard where they have tons of data. Now, it's still very early on in Arcs of Omen, but they still have some data. So this is what their meta dashboard looks like, and you'll have it up behind me here. But you can see the main thing here is, in terms of orcs, there's two main sub-factions that are doing decently well, and that's both by these boxes here represent the color. Obviously gray is not great, you want it to be blue. That's lucky, right? But that means both these sub-factions have about a 51% win rate, and the size is basically a relative game. So those two sub-factions are Orcs and Death Skulls and Orcs Goths. Goths have a bit higher representation, about 220 games played. Death Skulls a little less, 74. So let's dig into what those two factions are playing right now, and then we'll start digging into what we need to beat to win the event. All right, so where do I go to try to figure out what are the current orc lists that are being played? There's two options. The first, if you want to do it yourself, you can go into Best Coast Pairings. If you have a subscription, you can search lists, you can plug in orcs, and you can scroll through every event that's in BCP and see how the orcs are doing, and you can click on individual lists and see them. If you don't want to do that yourself, there is another option. You can go over to 40kstats.com. That's powered by the folks over at Goonhammer. This is what the page looks like at the top. It has also a lot of similar data to what we were seeing over on the StatCheck page. But if you scroll down, they already kind of collate top 4 finishes for your faction, so we can quickly find lists that have done well with orcs, and then we can pull those lists and see them. Now, of these lists here, looks like the top 4 are all Goths, and so that was a great way to see what is in the Goth faction, what's commonly being played. Generally speaking, we're seeing a lot of smashy characters, beast bosses, war bosses on bike, truck bosses with Killer Claw. We're seeing Beast Snaggle boys, we're seeing Squig Hog boys, we're seeing some commandos, and we're seeing some kill rigs. And you may see knobs or mega knobs depending on your faction. And sometimes you may see some folks taking in Gazgul. But generally speaking, a lot of really aggressive, really durable stuff that's coming up the board. There's some great folks that have talked about everything that goes on with what we call the Goth pressure list. You can check that out. There's a great example of a game from Frontline Gaming's stream of the LVO. Round 5 was Lucas Troller's Orcs versus John Lennon's Tyranids. It was a great example of using the Goth pressure list. That list hasn't changed too much going from Nephilim to Arcs of Omen, so that gives us a basis to work with on what is the Goths list. Now, the other list archetype that's been doing pretty well, an example we can find on that is Brian Seep's Death Skulls list that he took to LVO. That also was on stream. I believe that was round 2, so it's another opportunity for you to go check out and see how that list works. This list, because of Death Skulls get that benefit for infantry in terms of being OBSEC, he took a lot of infantry to try to really utilize that particular aspect of the list to score well against some armies by doing primary denial. So take a look there to see your example on Death Skulls, and you're also when you're over at YouTube, check out the video for Goths. But that's the basis of where are the armies right now. At least that's how I'm finding that information. So let's look at where the meta is going and what we might need to consider when building our list. So where do I think we need to go next is back over to StatCheck, and we go back to the meta dashboard, and we look at this information here. And I kind of blew it up for you, but it's part of the meta dashboard. It is the faction versus faction win rates. We know, generally speaking, orcs are kind of in the middle overall at 50, which is a good place to be. But this gives us an idea of what our tough matchups are going to be, and that, knowing what lists have been functioning, gives us an idea of which way we want to go. So again, it's going to be organized by size of box is prevalence of that matchup, so the number of times we have seen those matchups played against each other, and then again, color is going to indicate win rate. So upper make sure I'm getting this right because I'm probably having to flip some images in the editing process, but the upper right box is the most common matchup, or sorry, upper left. It's upper left. Most common matchup, and that's Custodes. And that's kind of a red color. We have a win rate of 44%, so Custodes are definitely giving us trouble. Now, there's definitely a path forward, I think, for orcs into Custodes using Goths or Death Skulls. I think in both scenarios, you're trying to overwhelm them. In the Goths pressure, you're just trying to kill them. But in Death Skulls, you still can kill them, but you also do run that ability to maybe steal some of their objectives away from them. So that's interesting. That's something for us to keep in mind, that both of those lists have a play style there, I think. The next big red box is Dark Angels. Less commonly we're running into those, but they're certainly going to be on the upswing in the meta. There's multiple lists out there that I've seen now that are a bunch of Deathwing Terminators, but I've also seen Ravenwing that are very shooty. So we have to kind of keep that in mind. I think Goths might struggle a little bit into the Deathwing because that 2-up armor save with a nice storm shield is really going to kind of blunt some of the damage we do, along with their transhuman. Death Skulls might have a little better options there because we can maybe not necessarily rely so much on killing and rely a bit more on primary denial, particularly with that Stubborn Defiance secondary that Deathwing armies like to take, where they just sit on objective. We could try to get sneaky and steal that objective off them. So I think that gives us some good play. The Ravenwing list is very fast and very shooty. I think both lists can do well by trying to tie up the opponent in combat and prevent them from being able to shoot as optimally. And they're probably not going to have as much OBSEC in the Ravenwing list, so that might give Death Skulls a little bit of a boost going into playing the mission in that scenario. Otherwise, going through the more common matchups, we start to look at some of the grays, and that's things like Leagues of Votann, Grey Knights, Necrons, and Iron Hands. Now, I'll tell you right off the top, Iron Hands are still very deadly, very shooty. I think you can put them in the same kind of thought process you would put them in with a Raven Wing list, where we're going to have to try to tie them up as much as we can and play the mission. So I like Death Skulls there. Leagues of Votann, they are also a very killy army. They definitely got some points buffs, so they're not as killy anymore because there's a little bit less of them. But the thing that Leagues of Votann always struggled with was bringing a lot of OBSEC. And with the new Arcs of Omen detachment, I've seen a lot of Leagues players go away from taking some of their basic infantry, which gives us two advantages. One, sorry, my squig's running around in the background. One, they'll have less things to screen their army with. And two, they have less OBSEC. Every time I hear less OBSEC, I'm more interested in Death Skulls. That gives us a chance to leverage that sub-faction ability. So I'm leaning a bit more towards Death Skulls there until I see Necrons. Necrons still are playing their OBSEC spam, Eternal Conquerors list. And Relentless Expansions, I think those are the two sub-factions. So Death Skulls aren't as attractive there. You're mainly just trying to kill the Necrons. Now the question is, Goths are always going to be a little bit better in the killing department because of exploding sixes, but is this extra strength necessary? I don't know. It's something to think about. But the Goth list with the kill rigs usually ends up taking more mechanisms for mortal wounds in the form of psychic powers, and Necrons don't have a great defense against that. They also have Satan. Satan can be a real nightmare sometimes. Anything that's wound capped per phase. I really just want to have a lot of psychic powers with orcs because psychic powers are more reliable than orc shooting generally to get some wounds through. So that gives us the psychic phase to do some damage, some shooting, and then maybe even some charge damage with something like ramming speed to get some damage on those targets, and then do the actual damage in combat to try to take one of those wound cap models and single turn 3-phase them. So when I see Necrons there, it makes me a little bit leery of taking Death Skulls, maybe a little bit more Goths there. Grey Knights. Grey Knights have a lot of bullets. They have a lot of bullets anymore. They have everyone's in the Grey Knight army for some reason. They strapped a storm bolter right on their arm. That makes me really leery of the infantry heavy build, which is the Death Skull build. So that's something that I probably need some practice with before I really commit to that matchup. And then I want to point out one more box that we don't, two more boxes that we don't have a ton of data on. There is the Astra Militara, which is only 13 games played. So we technically have a positive win rate there at 54%, but that's only 13 games played. So we definitely need to see which way that matchup is going to go. So I know I personally am going to try to get some reps this weekend, actually, after I edit this film, and get some idea of how best to play that matchup. The other one that everyone's saying is the big boogeyman is Gene Stealer Cult, and that's actually even less data. We have 9 games, but it is a lower win rate, a 44% win rate. So that's also something that we don't have a lot of experience with. I don't know how that matchup's going to play, but everyone's saying the Gene Stealer Cult are really strong in Arcs of Omen. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to have the answer this weekend before I have to submit my list for Cherokee. I don't know many Gene Stealer Cult players that are really well-versed in the Army, and that is one of those armies that you want someone that is really strong with it to show you how it works. And for me, I think it's going to be one of those cases where I'm just going to have to take some L's to learn how that army works, because I don't really know off the top of my head right now what I would do either running a Goff's list or a Death Skulls list into something like that. All right, so with all that data at my disposal, what list am I going to run? I don't know. I have a list. I'm lying. I do know what I want to run, but I have some reps I want to get in the next few days that may change that. But this is where I'm sitting right now, and I think right now I want to go with the Death Skull list. Playing Primary Denial helps orcs deal with the fact that sometimes we don't have the best secondaries. We have really strong secondaries, but we only really have 2 of the 3 that we need. So sometimes you're kind of stuck dealing with an do I get a good kill secondary off my opponent or something like that? So playing Primary Denial makes up for the fact when we're running those factions that can get, a strong 45 on secondary. If we play Primary Denial, we can keep their primary score low and make up for the fact that maybe we're only getting 38 to 40 on our secondaries. So that's the idea, at least. So that's what I'm trying. And that is not my idea. That is entirely from me talking with Vanguard Tactics. Stephen Box and I had a conversation early on in the process. I told him where I felt I was with orcs. He said, you should be trying Primary Denial. So hats off to that man. That's where I'm at. That's what I'm trying. Looks like we've got another squig visiting in the background. So here's what I've got. I have, starting off with an actual War Boss and Mega Armor. I gave him Art as Nails and Super Cyborg Body to make him as durable as possible. He's basically, when I have something big, bad, and scary, he's basically just going to try to hold back the tide while I continue to play the rest of the game. He also gives a nice little bubble of +1 to hit, which is super useful for the army. And he's OBSEC, so there you go. Cool. I then have a Truck Boss. I gave him a Combi Scorcha, To Kill a Claw, Brutal but Cunning, and an Attack Squig. Pretty standard dude, very, very threatening, can do a lot of damage, and in a truck has a really big threat range. So when my opponent has a unit that I just can't let hit me, and I want to threaten them, he's my great threat piece. He also goes in a truck and gives whatever else is in that truck +1 to hit. So sometimes I put him in the truck with some of my shooting units, which we'll get to later in the list, to kind of buff a little bit of that ballistic skill. Then the last character I have is a Weird Boy. He's got the Jump and Warpath. That is a super useful little guy. He's nothing special in terms of no Warlord traits or relics or anything like that. But what he can do is, one, he opens up psychic secondaries for me. I know we're removing Abhor the Witch from our options, but in the games where I have just really bad secondary options, having access to something like Psychic Interrogation or Warp Ritual sometimes is enough to be like, hey, okay, I have a plan now. But the other thing I love about him, Warpath is just kind of there. I'll use it when I can. But the Jump is kind of my main squeeze with him, because being able to threaten at every turn of the game, I'm going to teleport these guys into a part of the field, really opens up a lot of options for us secondary-wise. Behind enemy lines, Green Tide are both things that we need to be in certain positions on the table, and I can just teleport to it, which is great. It also gives us the ability to threaten early on in the game. So if my opponent's like, I'm just going to sit way back and there's no way I can move out and threaten with my units, I can be like, all right, fine. I'm going to sacrifice a small unit, maybe a unit of Beast Snaggle Boys. I'm going to jump them up. I'll run them into your screens. I'll clear some screens. All I sacrificed was a 100-point unit of infantry. I've cleared some screens, or I've tagged important models, so something like that. So a lot of utility and threat just from I could cast a psychic power. Speaking of troops, I do run 3 units of 10 Beast Nagas and 4 units of 10 Gretchen. The 10 Gretchen are mostly there just to try to get me good bits, as well as just be cheap bodies to go sit on objectives, help me screen out my backfield, and help me with Green Tide. The Beast Naga boys, sometimes I'll foot slog them. Sometimes I'll put them in strategic reserve. They're real useful as a little countercharge tool if someone pushes deep in my deployment zone early on. I can be like, all right, cool, I'm setting them up on the line of my deployment zone through the strategic reserve mechanic, where you can be touching your board edge and within 9s to make some short charges there. And they're not a lot of points to invest in, and they're OBSEC, and they're decent in combat, and they are good against killing vehicles, and they unlock a lot of stratagems. So great little tools. Moving on down to my elite slot, this is where I went with my 6 choices. I got 6 elites. I got 2 units of commandos. I took a bomb squig and a power claw on each. I love bomb squigs. They're a great utility piece to chip some wounds off, because I don't have a lot of shooting in this list. So these are a great way if I am trying to tri-phase a wound-capped, wound-locked unit. I can use those for that. They're a great little tool for that. And commandos are just generally a strong unit for their points. They get a good cover save. I can forward deploy if I need to on certain missions like Vital Intelligence, where maybe being midfield in the first turn to obsec those midfield objectives and put some stickies down is a great idea. And they're still really decent in combat. I didn't have the points for the distraction garrote, so I have to be a little bit more cagey with them to get them near terrain to get that +1 to wound, but they're still doing a lot of good work. Follow that up with kind of my heavy hitters of the list is 2 units of 5 Mega Knobs, just claws and shooters. If I had points and dreams, I might upgrade them, but that's as cheap as I can get them right now. And they do threaten a lot of those bigger targets. I can run them in. These are going to usually end up in my trucks as well. So they're a little bit more mobile and protected, and then they can kind of get out and push on some of those heavier targets that I need to put some big damage on. And then my last 2 elites are 2 units of 5 tank busters with a tank hammer and a bomb squig in each. Now, you would think, okay, this is a really tiny unit, but it ends up, if I put both of those units in a truck with the truck boss, I end up getting 8 D3 shots from that unit every turn with +1 to hit natively, and then +1 to hit again if you're a vehicle, which can counteract the moving with a heavy weapon, and I can still hit on 4s, which is pretty good. So there's a decent amount of damage from them. Again, bomb squigs are useful, and then the tank hammer is really nice in combat, particularly using that, pardon me, using that Death Skull reroll allows them to more reliably get that hit and do D6 mortal wounds. And this little unit has a decent amount of damage output then for its points. It's also OBSEC, so it's a great little mobile unit in a truck that I can use. I can also put them in strategic reserve. There's also a strat to do extra mortal wounds against vehicles in combat. So a lot of little options for me to get through some of those tougher things that are out there in the meta. That maybe my list only has 1 or 2 answers for in natural punching combat. Then we move on to our fast attack. I had to go with Storm Boys here. It was between Storm Boys or Squighog Boys. If I'm playing Death Skulls, I want it to be infantry. So I went with Storm Boys. Storm Boys are great for their mobility. They can get across the field quickly with that auto advance 6, and their base movement of 12. So they're great early game pressure units or repositioning. If my opponent, deep strikes in an area I wasn't expecting them, they're quick to react to that kind of stuff. So I just love the mobility there. And again, they're still decent in combat. I wish they had better weapons than just choppas, but it's what we got. I managed to get a claw on the sergeants. It's a little expensive at 10 points a model as compared to 5 for like the commandos, but we persevere. And then I have 3 trucks. Now this is the part where I get some people, including like Brian, who ran Death Skulls at LVO, to kind of wrinkle their brows at me. Dead trucks, what are you battle wagons, Seth? I think in terms of the meta, and this is another reason I went with Death Skulls over Goffs, I think because of things like Guard, Lehman Rust tanks, because of some of the larger demons running around, and then because of maybe a little bit of Space Marines with things like Storm Speeders, I think people are going to be teching into killing large monsters or vehicles, things T7, T8 or higher. and I didn't want to put a lot of points into my transports. So I can take 3 trucks or roughly 2 battle wagons for the same points. It's not quite perfect, but my thought process, the trucks are a smaller footprint, easier for me to hide. I'm investing less in them, so I'm not losing out on other models I could have in my army by going with like 3 battle wagons. They're pretty fast. They still have ramshackle, so they're all right against small arm fire. And I just think something like kill rigs or battle wagons, although certainly can do a bunch more damage and have more wounds and more transport capacity, I think they're going to be a little bit more hampered as people adapt to the coming meta, and they start bringing those tools to kill those other T8 models, and they're just incidentally going to be able to kill our transports. So that's at least why I'm trying trucks. It might be the wrong call, but that's where I want to be for now. All right, and that's my list. Like I said, I'm still doing playtesting. It says I'm recording this on Friday. I don't have to list lock until Sunday. So I'm going to be doing some games this weekend. I'm going to play against World Eaters. I'm going to play against Guard. I'm going to play against Dark Angels and get a feel if this list really is going to take me where I want to go. I might not win those games, but if I still learn those matchups and learn if that is a winnable matchup for me if I play with a certain strategy in mind, that's an option. I want to feel like I have an option. I don't want to walk up to the table and feel like, nope, you just lose. So that's my thought process there. I have taken this list to an RTT the previous weekend. I got a couple games against Custodes and another game against Tau. I went 3-0 there. RTTs are great for running into things that maybe you don't see in bigger events because people are willing to experiment a little bit more, try factions they're maybe not so familiar with. So it's a little bit more diverse sometimes. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, but I'm not banking on I definitely have those matchups in the bag just because I want them at an RTT. But it gives me an idea that there is obviously a path forward there. So that's where I'm at with my list right now. I've got some more meetings scheduled with Vanguard Tactics to help me kind of refine that. I've got obviously Cherokee coming up where I'm going to get a lot of games, and I might come back from that saying, hey guys, I found a big deficiency in my list, but that's the process. That's what we're going to do. We're going to learn from these events. I don't expect that I'm going to go in there and win it all, but I expect that I'm going to have some good games. I might find some problems in my list. I might find some bad matchups. I might make some big mistakes in how I play the list, and I'm going to learn, and that's the point. I'm going to learn, and I'm trying to get better. This is the first step on the process to the biggest and the best general. I don't expect to come out of the gate and win it all, but I do expect that I should learn something in this process. So until next time, this is Seth the Mad Dog saying thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate all the support I'm getting. That's been fantastic. And have a good wah.